Hello, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to see and welcome all of you to the second panel in celebration of Professor Carole Boyce Davies. My name is Naminata Diabate, Associate Professor of Comparative Literature here at Cornell. And it's my immense pleasure to be moderating the second panel. The task of moderating may include providing a few overarching framing remarks. But before I give the floor to three of the panelists, two whom are present here, one over Zoom, let me provide a brief synopsis of the ways in which I have interacted with Professor Davies over the years since my arrival at Cornell 12 years ago as a postdoctoral fellow. And then, I transitioned into an assistant professor. Of course, before coming to Cornell, I was introduced to Professor Carole Boyce Davies' work through her first monograph, which was published in 1994. And that text, is seminal, was seminal, and is still seminal in our theorization of what it is, in our theorization of Black women's subjectivity. And the text has already been evoked, and it is Black women writing. Let me get the full title: Black Women Writing and Identity, Migrations of the Subject. And this is one of the lines that I always start my classes with. And here it goes. The terms that we use to name ourselves: Black, African, African American, Black British, minority, Latino, Latina, West Indian, Caribbean, Hispanic, people of color, women of color, Afro-Caribbean, Third World, and so on, carry the strings of echoes and inscriptions. Each represents an original misnaming and the simultaneous constant striving of the dispossessed for full representation. Each therefore must be used provisionally. At each arrival at a definition, we begin a new analysis, a new departure, a new interrogation of meaning, new contradictions. For me and for my intellectual project, this is an invitation. This is actually an injunction to always arrive at new contradictions. But to come to terms with those new contradictions is not always a happy affair. It's actually a brutal affair. It's an affair that sometimes are painful. So, as part of that painful experience, because that's what growth emerges. Growth is never easy. This is a moment of growth. So, the panel is called Black Women, Leadership, and Black Feminist Theories. And here we have Professor Carole Archer and Dr. Courtney Carr. And we also have Nicole Mensa, who has sent us a video. So to start, we will have Professor Carole Archer, who is going to self-introduce. Mm-hmm.
Morning, everyone. So I'm sending you warmth from Jamaica. I'm a little bit chilly, so I will, I have on my wrap. I am so grateful and so honored to be here, to be part of this panel and this group, honoring my mentor, my friend, Dr. Professor Carole Boyce Davies. I came across, we met, our paths merged in 1984, 85. Yeah. So I visited Binghamton yesterday and I stood in the student union and I go, this was 40 years ago. Yeah. And the energy of the space was still as I experienced 40 years ago. So that was a plus. I met with the students from the Caribbean Student Association, and they were just as passionate, perhaps not as much as we were back then, but just looking in, it was also having a mirrored experience. Me looking back at myself 40 years ago, and I went to the Caribbean, the Latin American and Caribbean studies, as graduated in 1987, and with a degree in double major, geography and Latin American and Caribbean studies. Now, Carole was my academic advisor. She was also the advisor to the Caribbean Students Association. Now, in came in 84. In 85, I became the president of the Caribbean Student Association. And that's where the relationship grew, because she was able to advise me on my discipline and also advise in terms of my leadership in among the Caribbean students, and also the largest student body in Binghamton. And I'm so grateful for the opportunities, because they were on several occasions. For those of us who are familiar with the history of student activism in Binghamton, when we are not satisfied with issues, we take to the student unions and we would demonstrate. And there was one such demonstration where we weren't satisfied with the delivery of the LACAS program. And I went to Carole Boyce Davies, very disgruntled, and her question, so what you going to do about it? And tell her, what you mean? Well, you're upset. You need to do something about it. And that led to changes with the program, where we had them recognized. Um, at first, they were asking us, if to come, you must have English, French, and Spanish. And I said, no, there are other languages spoken in the Caribbean. So you need to recognize. And we wrote, and Carole reviewed the letter. And eventually we threatened them and they changed the program. There was another opportunity where the Caribbean students were not being, in terms of our budget for activities, they had slashed the budget, not just of CSA, but for all the other left of center student groups. And we were upset, went to Carole, what you gonna do about it? Well, I think you, can I say it now? Because you've retired, right? And so she inspired us to lead a demonstration on the president's office. And we did, we took over the student union and we demanded, and we actually locked the student government in for a whole night until we got our demands, thanks to Carole and Miriam and Kelvin and others who were in the background, um, inspiring us. Not instigating, but inspiring us. Thank you. And so, um, well, yes, they were discouraging us about doing certain things, but encouraging us to make our demands, and we're grateful. And the truth is, for me personally, I've benefited from the teachings, and sitting at, literally sitting at your feet. And we continued our relationship. I'm now in Jamaica, and there's not really a month or a year would not have passed with us touching base and seeing each other in a various situation. But most recently, I had the opportunity. I climbed Kilimanjaro, and the thank you. The inspiration to climb Kilimanjaro came from Carole and many of my mentors that I've experienced over the years. Climbing it, I had at the peak, I had this epiphany that I'm now going to write about it. And I did. And I thought, okay, I need someone to write the foreword for the book. And Carole, image of Carole came to me. So I sent it to her. And I was, when you're like sitting on pins and needles, your legs crossed, your fingers crossed, your eyes crossed, um, waiting to see, oh my God, here is the ultimate, literary guru who's going to read my account of climb. And I asked her, and she sent back this beautiful, beautiful forward that, captured everything that I expected, in terms of her understanding of my experience. And I'm very grateful. So, my um, most recent publication, which is nothing to do with my academic scholarship, it's just me expressing myself as a Pan Africanist, as a woman, as someone who wants to inspire, as Carole did, inspire young women to reach to their highest. So in the book, To Kilimanjaro from Jeffreytown and Cities in Between, which I gave account of my travel, thank you for writing the forward. I'm honored. So my presentation this morning is looking at Black women leadership and the various theories, particularly around how we've used the various identities to access political leadership. Okay? So in the presentation, we're going to understand this whole notion of Caribbean identity, how the notion of Caribbean identity has been engaged by political leaders, women, during from the 1980s to the present, and then question what the future of the identities, whether they're ethnic, race, regional, or otherwise. What's the future of engaging these women in political leadership, engaging these various identities? So the presentation really is influenced by the most recent work of Carole, chapter 6 of her book on women in leadership. And we look particularly at the work of Una Clark, who was the first Caribbean elected official in New York City politics. I look at Portia Simpson Miller, the first woman to be elected in prime minister in Jamaica. Kamala Bisesa from Trinidad, Eugene Charles from from Dominica. And we look at how they have identified and how effective they have used this or these identities, as I'm arguing that they're using several identities. And then what will the future look like for them and for other women involved in politics? My background actually is I'm a political scientist, urban planner, and geographer working in the Caribbean, right, with a degree in Latin American and Caribbean studies. So hence the appropriateness of this presentation. Um, so when we look at the question of identity and particular group identity, we see the various theories being proposed, looking at the idea of the primordial theory, because we identify most from collective sentiments and action, or the instrumentalist that has been proposed by Barth and James Jones Carrera, that speaks to identity be formed based on conflict and the fact that people identify and delineate borders. We also see the emergence of a definition of group identity based on the situational approach, that it's not a matter that the group identity is not a matter of choice, but instead it is ascribed right? So we based on the situation, you're ascribed an identity. And in most recent, in terms of the identity theory that I'm looking at for the work of Caribbean women in particular, is this notion that it's a tripartite model in terms of how we identify now, and it's based on the cognitive, the affective, the behavioral. So we bring different levels and layers and nuances to the whole question of identity. So it's not just more, it has built on the primordial, the instrumental, and the situational, and look at a broader and a varying dynamics of identity. So for the Caribbean, specifically now for the Caribbean identity, um, that it's a larger encompassing identity, right? And this identity for me, certainly when I used it, when I examined it first, when I for my PhD dissertation, it spoke to this group identity that looked at power and the distribution of resources. So I questioned in New York City, in particular, where I was looking at the Caribbean immigrants, how are they? And this was in the 90s when Caribbean immigrants were now beginning to seize power in New York City politics. And so I asked the question, are they effectively and can they effectively use this group identity called Caribbean? And this Caribbean identity that I was interrogating was based on region, history, socioeconomic realities, and also politics of the host New York and also of the sending society. Yes? So, how do they use this broad identity to access resource, to access power? Right? Now, there's no consensus, yes, as to the effectiveness of this Caribbean identity. In fact, the work of Ralph Pendas, in particular, that it is problematic for us to use the Caribbean identity because the region, as we know, is not unified. It doesn't necessarily connote this common citizenship. In fact, this whole Caribbean is a figment of one's imagination. So why is it now that I'm using it as an name? But I argue that it is viable, and my research I attempted to show, and so now I am building on it, following the work of Carole in her most recent work to say, yes, this is something we can interrogate and explore. So for me, this particular notion of Caribbean identity is more so operationalized outside of the region. Yes? Yes, we do have notion of the Caribbean identity within the region. I'm going to speak a little bit more about it. But you see it more being operationalized among Caribbean immigrants within the diaspora, whether it's in the US, in Canada, or in Great Britain. And of course, we have evidence to show that it's based on the historical, socio-political, and cultural commonalities of the people of the region. And now that we have this agreed, well, through my work saying, yes, there is this agreed definition of the Caribbean identity, and this identity is allowing them to participate in politics, how is this being operationalized? Is it by the political elites, those who are elected, those who are supporting those who are running for office? And also, I ask, is it necessary for women in political leadership, whether it's in the Caribbean or in the diaspora, is it necessary for women to develop this Caribbean identity to leverage greater political gain? Or are they using other forms? What other forms of identity they are leveraging for political gains? So I looked at the work of and pronouncement made by Eugenia Charles from Dominica, from Portia Simpson Miller, Mia Motley, and Una Clark and Kamala. Right now, Eugenia Charles, when it's very clear, her work around the issue of Caribbean identity is very questionable. Yes, she was the one among those who had um, supported the U.S. invasion of Grenada in 1983, 84. And so it wasn't about us Caribbean working together. And even afterwards, when you see her work, while she was very well, it was clear that she had an appreciation of the impact as a woman to be elected the first woman in the Anglophone Caribbean to be head of government. So she was sensitive to that. From her pronouncement, race was not an issue. And then, of course, the whole notion of Caribbean identity was not an issue. Yes? So we see her and we can say, well, what is the contribution of Eugenia Charles to this notion of Caribbean identity? Then there is Kamala, elected in 2010 in Trinidad. Now, the work and the pronouncement of Besesa was very clear. Her identity was yes, there was consideration of gender, but there was more consideration of ethnicity. And the notion of the Caribbean identity was, secondary at best. And there were questions in terms of her commitment to the Caribbean identity or even to the national identity. There was this major argument, especially when she had visited India. And she, her actions towards the Indian prime minister was what the Trinidadians, both Indians and African Trinidadians, questioned. You're a leader. Why would you go and literally subjugate yourself as opposed to, stand on ceremony as a head of state to another head of state? And also, we saw, and Carole mentioned in her book, that she failed in her leadership because she was not able to successfully navigate whether it was ethnic, the Caribbean identity, or even the gender identity, because she was really manipulated by the male leaders within her political party. So the whole question now of her, how well she was able to use the various identities to navigate, one could argue that that was primarily from her notion of the Indo-Caribbean, in some instance, because of how she participated in the larger Caribbean, there was their sense of Caribbean identity, but the question of the larger racial identity was second to none. Yeah, racial in terms of the race identifying stronger as the Indo Caribbean as opposed to a wider Caribbean. Then there is Portia Simpson Miller. Simpson Miller, who became the first first Jamaican female prime minister in '06, and lost in '07, but then was elected in 2011. And from her pronouncement and the work that she has done, it's very clear that she had very strong racial identity. You would have heard it in her speech and, global pronouncements. In terms of the Caribbean identity, again, there are strong evidence of that in terms of how she participated, whether it was with CARICOM or made representation on the global scale. Her national identity was also very strong. So she was able to navigate the different levels and layers of the question of identity as she participated in the global political sphere. Um, she spoke and she benefited from, because as part of the mandate of her political party to expand and to build on the Caribbean Federation, Norman Manley being one of the founders of the Federation, and she came out of that tradition, so she continued. So there was enough evidence for us to show that, yes, she was able to navigate, whether it was based on gender, whether it was based on the issue of race, or the broader Caribbean identity, and of course the national identity. Then we look to Mayor Motley, recently 2018, um, elected as the head of the Barbados Labour Party. Um, Motley has always and consistently been, based on her work and pronouncements, identify and use the whole notion of the Caribbean West Indian identity. Yes, um, she was influenced by persons in the form of Michael Manley and, of course, the his father Norman Manley, and she would have talked about the importance of um, building on this notion of the Caribbean identity to improve the lives and livelihood of the Caribbean people. So we see evidence of that. We also see evidence of Motley being, um, when she, especially in the global space, and more recently, her work around climate change impact. It's not just about climate change impact of small island developing states, but climate change impact of particular people of African ancestry. So it's very clear in terms of her ability to navigate and to build coalition based on that of the Caribbean identity, certainly gender, and of the racial identity. And she's successfully been able to navigate that. And we have the other person I'm looking at, the other female political leader, is that of Una Clark. And Una Clark has been perhaps the one most successful in um, utilizing this notion of the Caribbean identity. Yeah? When in her political campaigns from 1993 to when she left office in the late 1990s. And then, of course, her daughter, Yvette Clarke, who is now the congressperson representing the Ninth Congressional District, we see the continuation of this notion of the Caribbean identity. And she was able to successfully navigate this identity, and it provided her with the base for her to be elected as the council member for the largest Caribbean district. It also allowed her daughter to be elected as the congresswoman for that district and other districts. But it did not, she did not only use the notion of the Caribbean identity, she, and based on interviews that, looking at the work of Carole and the work that I continue to do on Caribbean immigrants in New York, it's very clear that she is mindful of the racial identity. Yes, because you're in New York, you know, it is very clear where we live, how we navigate, and the fact that it is necessary for us to, in order to access and to maintain this power in terms of political power, we need to be able to navigate the different levels and layers of these various identities. So it, one of the takeaways for me in looking at this question of the identities and the application of Caribbean identity, yes, Caribbean, whether the Caribbean diaspora or the Caribbean region, and particularly um, female political leaders, they are able to navigate depending on the situation. But for the most part, the question of race, while it's still complex, it plays an important role in shaping identities among the Caribbean and Caribbean immigrant communities. Yes? And we see it even more pronounced in the last, election here. Um, and if we were to look at the work of even the vice president, that while she was cognizant of her Indian, Caribbean, Jamaican heritage, she utilized the broader racial identity informed by her social upbringing in Oakland, California, and um, her experience at Howard University. So, sorry, I'm not. I don't. Oh, yes, you can see. So, then now, question. So, what is the future of how women in leadership navigate and use these varying identities? Huh? That's it. Yes. So, um, so while there seemed to be a large Caribbean identity, this identity is based on the sociocultural, but it's the racial identity is coming more to the fore. So during the 1980s, as Caribbean immigrants were expanding in numbers, the Caribbean identity came to the fore. They were able to access power. We saw that at the different levels, both among the diaspora community and in the host country. But now, in this period of time, the racial identity, I would argue, is coming more to the fore. So let us just fast forward. Who is leading this, right? For the most part, it is the elected officials who have been able to utilize, but the identity, I argue, is really being informed by that larger community, the people both in the Caribbean diaspora and back in the Caribbean who were saying, look, at this time in our history, the racial identity is paramount. So there is a switch. There has been a switch because what the research would have shown early in the period, growth of the Caribbean identity, and we've seen the pronouncements among the leaders, but at this particular time in our history, it is the racial identity that is now dominant for advancing a worldview. So in the interest of time, I will stop here and we can have discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Archer. So, okay, thank you. So we have Professor Siga Jagne, who is joining us from the Gambia. So Professor Jagne is an academic of international acclaim, a senior advisor on gender research, social development, youth policy, poverty, and a communication expert bringing over 27 years of research and practical experience in monitoring and evaluation to development challenges. So once the video is ready, or shall I say Zoom is ready to roll, you will join me in welcoming Dr. Siga Jagne. Okay. We are so grateful that Dr. Siga is going to be joining us from the Gambia.
I'm here. Can I start coming?
Hannah, did she hear us?
Yes.
Now?
I just need to know if I can come in.
Hello, Dr. Jagne.
Hello, all my friends are there.
Yes,
Yes.
we just
Yes.
introduced you, and
Yes.
we are so thrilled that you're able to join us from the Gambia to celebrate the work and intellectual project of Professor Carole Boyce Davies. We just
Yes.
introduced you, and we welcome you, and we are thrilled to hear you, and the audience has just applauded you.
Yes.
So you have the floor.
Thank you very much. For me, this is the greatest pleasure I have had in a long time because Carole has really contributed so much to not just Caribbean literature, but Black literature in general, be it African or otherwise, from Brazil to to the Cape of Senegal. Everywhere we have been going out with setting up the museum in Dakar, which was a major, it's been a major feat for us as Africans to have. I think the one thing I always said about Carole is she's always ahead. And when I worked with her for a long time because we met in Ithaca, I have to tell you the story. She was looking for somebody to braid her children, and somebody told her that there's somebody in Ithaca who could braid. That's how we met, but that meeting ended up not just being braiding, but being an intellectual exercise. And we've been together since then. and I love Carole because she's not like some of us, very formal, which makes it very important when you're doing research, especially on women, to be open to hear anything. Because we worked a lot on performance poetry, since it's a female art form, which the men have actually taken over and put into rap, but it's still ours and we will claim it. We work together also on this women's performance poetry, which is called Tasu in Wolof. It's actually a female form and not a male one. But because I guess when the big guy from Kaula, Papanjai Chopet, started doing it, it became a male form also. But generally it's a female form. And another thing that is very important, I think, is the link between Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, because there's definitely a huge link between us. When you really go deep inside, I remember the first time I met Carole, actually, I told her, "Are you from Senegal?" Because she looked so Senegalese. I thought she was Senegalese. She said, "I'm from Trinidad." I said, "But people from Trinidad, a lot of people from Senegal were moved to Trinidad during the slave trade." So I was not surprised that we kind of looked alike, and in terms of height and everything. And this is one area I think we need to really research on, these linkages from Africa to the Caribbean, to Latin America, even to India. The connections are all there. The connections of the Black people and their experiences around the world. And another thing I like about Carole is how she encourages you to do your best at all times. If you say, I don't think I can do this, she will say, you can do it. And I think a lot of us have published articles and books because of the kinds of conversations we have had with her, which has helped us also to clarify our thoughts and really relook what we are doing and making sure that we take it further than we think we could take it. And I'm so excited about that. And I think this meeting is so important, not only to say goodbye, but to thank her for starting a lot of our careers, for supporting everybody with food and everything. Like I said, we first met because I was going to braid her children. There was no one in Binghamton braiding. So I became the braider for upstate New York, I guess. And that's how we interacted. And I think there's still a lot that all of us who have passed through her can still do. I know I did my books, I did my articles, and I ended up where I didn't know I was going to ever end up, which was heading the gender and social affairs of ECOWAS. I didn't know I was going to end up in the regional economic community, but that's where I ended, and that's where I retired from. But you wouldn't, as a writer, I'm still writing. I'm still doing my poetry. I'm still doing everything because I can't stay away from it. And I was so excited to hear that this panel was put together. I was supposed to have been in New York with you people, but because of all this confusion with whether, you know, I'm sure you all know by now that Donald Trump has basically dumped Gambia and taken the embassy away from Gambia. So we are persona non grata, I guess, those of us from Gambia, in terms of coming back to the US. But me, I know I can come back because I have, my children are there and everything, my family. But these are the issues, new issues that we will be grappling with. It's going to be who's a real American, who's a real whatever you are, because who is going to stay here and who's going to be taken out, because I think these are going to be major issues in this country that those of us in academia and who have worked at international level should really start looking at how we engage on these issues, because it will affect mostly everybody. And the good thing we've been having is we have very strong women leaders in Africa, and they've been taking their stance. They're refusing to export their gold out to the US, and which I think a man would have done. And they're also saying that they're also fighting for the rights of women and young girls who have already left there and in the US. So these are the main conversation points that are taking place right now, since I'm in Africa, that's amongst the people. And like I said, our US embassy has been closed in Gambia and has been moved to Dakar because according to Trump, they can't have an embassy in Gambia and one in Dakar because Gambia is in the middle of Senegal. So they just need one. So, so these are all issues we will be coming up with, and our children will be faced with it, and issues of identity, being brought up. And we as a group, especially us women too, we have to really sit and think about what our role is going to be in this kind of environment. Right now, it's only the women leaders in Africa who are actually opening their mouths and speaking. The men are not saying anything. So we need to encourage these women presidents and vice presidents to continue this work. And we are having, we have a lot of meetings here, of course, on political issues and issues of that affect us as women in the international field. So this is all because this critical questioning and thinking is all because I went to Spelman College and had some tough teachers, and then I moved to Ithaca and got even more. And then when I got to Carole, it was like, it has to be perfect. So it's been a journey that I enjoyed. And like I say, I still want to work, and I'm still working with young people. I've been teaching a lot at the University of Gambia in not just English, but I've also been teaching in other areas, because there's so many new areas coming out with the IT issue. We've been getting a lot of people more interested in IT, but linking it with their majors. And we are seeing all the young women now are working towards being engineers, which is very encouraging. And these are the things that I hope we as academics will continue to push for those who are working in these areas, to assist them and to talk to them about, maybe help them balance what they want and the results they want to get. So this is just my, because there's not much time, but I couldn't miss it. This is what these are the issues I just wanted to raise.
Thank you so much, Dr. Siga. This is Naminata, so we cannot wait to meet you somewhere at the University of the Zambia. So would you be able to stick around for the question and answers, or would you need to go?
No, I'm fine. Today is Friday. We've already gone to the mosque already. We've prayed, so.
Okay, because I think that you are bringing up some major points that will have to take up during the question and answers. For example, who are some of the major leaders who are speaking up against what is happening in the United States? You know, could that dovetails nicely with some of Carole's points? So we'd love to speak some more about those. So do stick around if you do have time.
It's okay. I just prayed. So I have another 3 hours before the next prayer.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. So thank you. So has Mensa's video been totally, if it is, because, you know, a video is so drains energy. So that I would love us to end on a upbeat note. So if it is totally downloaded, I would like us to move on to that one. If it is not, of course. It's okay. So what do we have then? Courtney. So we will have our fourth panelist, Courtney Carr, recently earned her PhD from Temple University in Afroecology and African. Yes, thank you, Carole. That deserves a round of applause. Afroecology and African American Studies. She earned her master's in Pan-African Studies from Syracuse University and her bachelor's in Africana Studies from Cornell University. I remember when we worked on your honors thesis.
Yes.
I mean, you were terrific. And her research interests include a non-governmental organization discourse, transnational feminism, and unpacking narrative formulations about women impacted by female genital cutting. Her dissertation focused on NGO discourse about young women impacted by female genital cutting in Tanzania and how website captions and statistics mask the humanity of the people involved. Through centering the narratives of African women, their voices cultivate a word magic that transcends the rhetorical confines of linear time and space continuums. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Courtney Carr.
Thank you so much. I want to give a bit of a story like many people have, because personally, I've been super impacted by Dr. Boyce Davies. I remember being in that library, actually sitting there. I used to work there when I was an undergraduate, and I had a not so good time applying to PhD programs. And so I was just down bad in the library, sitting there, and Dr. Boyce Davies came in there and we struck up a conversation. And just like a Caribbean mother, out of nowhere, you know, that they have empty cupboards and empty refrigerator, but then you see a meal come out on the table. And in that same vein, out of nowhere, I received an email from another professor at Syracuse, Dr. Linda Carty, who also really impacted my career as well. And I ended up going and getting my master's degree at Syracuse, and the rest is history. So I'm just super grateful for ways in which Black women have been instrumental throughout my whole academic career. And I definitely, as soon as I graduated, sent her a picture and was like, I just want you to know you're a part of this journey and I'm super appreciative. So I can't say that enough. Perfect. So I'm going to be talking about young Black women particularly, and ways in which they are contributing to Afrofuturistic word magic, which I'm going to decipher as we continue this. But as you can see from the picture, it is blurry. It's intentionally blurry. Please don't hurt your eyes trying to see what's on the picture. I made it blurry intentionally. This is where our story starts. Here is a picture that is truly worth 1,000 words, but in my case, it became a dissertation. This photo is taken from the Human Rights Watch website. Although it is a harder link to find now, and I was only able to access it because it is embedded in my dissertation, if in 2018 you typed in keywords like female genital cutting or Tanzania, the link to this website would be a few clicks away with images such as the one featured here. I made the intentional decision to blur the images so as not to directly replicate the colonial voyeurism being imagined here. If this image were more clearly envisioned, you would see a school-age girl in front of what a Western eye would call a hut. Rather than wearing traditional clothing, she has on her school uniform with a backpack on. In the background is her family with Maasai wraps around them. No one is looking into the camera, so it becomes a true off-guard National Geographic production. I came across this picture initially as an undergraduate student at Cornell University, doing preliminary research for my thesis, so sitting right here in these very walls. While doing this research, I did not expect that I would recognize one of the faces I would see on the website, so I knew this young woman. I interacted with her when I was in Tanzania. I met this young woman when I was in Tanzania in the summer of 2017, interning at the Network Against Female Genital Mutilation, NAFGEM, as their acronym. Next slide. The caption to the image featured on the website, I know it's probably hard to read up there, reads, Tigisi, now 12, was forced to marry at age 9, but now attends a boarding school with the support of NAFGEM, a local organization. Although I knew that Tigisi's story was impacted by female genital cutting, prompting her to seek the safe shelter at the organization, I was inundated and arguably overwhelmed by the fact that female genital cutting was not the beginning, middle, and end of Tigisi's story, as the organizational website attempted to imply. The caption that I read on the Human Rights Watch website was the impetus behind the work that I did for my master's thesis. In my master's thesis, I argued that non-governmental organization discourse reproduces monolithic understandings about girls impacted by female genital cutting. NGOs are often replicating the tune of neoliberal agendas in the global north, harmonious with medical racism and capitalistic iterations. For my master's thesis, I conducted interviews with girls aged 15 to 21 seeking safe shelter at the NGO, NAFGAM, with a translator present. The translator was also a social worker at the NGO. With the limited translations of the young women's words due to the assistance of the social worker, I underscored that due to the presence of the translator, who was also an employee at NAFGAM, the girls' voices were obfuscated so that the aims of the organization could be advanced. The translator's interjections during the interviews caused the girls' lived realities to be lost in translation. In the process of mistranslation, both the translator and the girls become reformed, recognizable others, recognizable in the NGO sphere, but unrecognizable to themselves. Next slide. My master's thesis was part of a socio-historical framework of medical racism advanced by non-governmental organizations such as the Human Rights Watch website and the World Health Organization. On the World Health Organization's website, which I have pictured here, they list as their key facts associated with what they name female genital mutilation as, the first bullet states, more than 230 million girls and women alive today have undergone female genital mutilation in 30 countries in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Asia. In Africa, Asia, the Middle East, where FGM is practiced. Throughout this presentation, I have not used the term mutilation, only to refer to the organization itself. But instead, I use the term female genital cutting. Terms such as female genital mutilation suggest all alterations are mutilation, all alterations to the vagina are mutilation, and alienate the girls and women who engage in the practice. Personally, when I think about mutilation, I think of a cow being mutilated from a UFO. That same alien process is happening when we use terms like mutilation. Circumcision suggests a false analogy to the more minor operations performed on men, while the term female genital cutting evolved out of respect and sensitivity to the women who never considered the procedure mutilation to begin with. The term mutilation also has Eurocentric implications, as can be seen from how the World Health Organization operationalizes the word on their website. From the cartography that they have etched, the practice of mutilation only happens in 30 countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. That does not make sense. And as the Gen Z kids like to say, the math isn't mathing. Next slide. However, when we look at a more encompassing website, like the Office on Women's Health, they paint a more holistic picture, stating that more than 513,000 girls and women in the US have experienced or are at risk of FGM/C. Contrary to the key facts posed by the World Health Organization, this is a trusted source, trusted. Enmeshed by its ties to the West and its Eurocentric projections, young women across the world have been impacted by female genital cutting, not just in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Next slide. The intricate webbing of Eurocentric projections brings us back to the image featured in one of our first slides from the Human Rights Watch organization. Metaphorically, with Tegisi's backpack and school uniform on, the key Maasai girl has left behind the antiquity of her indigeneity for the so-called progress of modernization and access to an education. What these National Geographic interpretations of reality often leave out is that young women in Tanzania do not have access to education due to the histories of colonialism and displacement that continue to impact the people of Tanzania. Tegisi, the name of the young woman featured here, disclosed by the Human Rights Watch website, ironically enough means patience. Colonialism has not extended an ounce of patience or grace to the people of Tanzania. Instead, they paint them as barbaristic entities in need of saving from their savagery, which leaves the true thingifiers, the colonizers, as Aimé Césaire would name them, to the continuity of their colonial devices. Next slide. There is no Tegese without the story of Sartij Bartman, the Hottentot Venus. The periphery imagery here, the way it parallels Tegese is really eerie, in my opinion. Sartij Bartman was a Khoisan South African woman who was paraded around Europe in the early 1800s as a circus freak, coined the Hottentot Venus. She was displayed for the optic of her large buttocks and elongated labia. Her body was deemed a medical anomaly because of what her sexualized body represented to the eyes of European men. Bartman died an early death, and her body became a scattered experiment, with parts dispersed across the European continent. It was not until 2002, almost 200 years after her birth, that Bartman's body was rightfully returned to South Africa after her skeleton and sexual organs had been on display in the Paris Museum until 1974. Next slide. In Medical Apartheid, Harriet Washington provides a description of the scientific racism that substantiated Sarah Bartman's parading. In 1839, American physician Samuel Morton described the Hottentot as, quote, the nearest approximation to the lower animals. As Washington describes, Khoi women's dramatically endowed features, especially their large fleshy buttocks, were seen as markers of their sexual prowess. Therefore, when Tegese wears her school uniform, distanced from her indigenous self, the West as a conglomerate perceives itself to be saving her from herself. In addition to the medical racism of Samuel Morton, Samuel Cartwright was producing pseudoscience to substantiate Black inferiority and otherness. In a 1848 paper entitled The Diseases and Peculiarities of the Negro Race, Cartwright suggested that Blacks' physical and mental defects made it impossible for them to survive without white supervision and care, alleging that the cranium of Blacks was 10% smaller than that of whites. He also alleged that the desire for enslaved people to want to run away, to be free, was a disease known as drapetomania. To be liberated, to be a disease. Nonsense. Black radical feminist frameworks provides us with the tools to see young Black women and Black people as human. In How We Get Free, in an interview with Black Lives Matter activist Alicia Garza, Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor provides a more expansive definition of Black feminism that acknowledges the humanity of Black people. In Being Human Being, Nadav and Malefi Asante provide us with a humanizing perspective to conceptualize the voices of young Black women. Myoticity is a foundational principle on which the judgment of life is made. Since a Black woman's mitochondrial DNA was believed to have walked the earth 100,000 years ago, she gave humanity its humanity. So young Black women's voices remain the key. When young Black women's voices are considered key, their standpoint calls into question what passes as truth and challenges the process of arriving at truth. When we consider the words and voices of young Black women like Tegese, we arrive at the truth and are better able to decipher the lies embedded in websites like the World Health Organization and the Human Rights Watch website. In a similar fashion, Dr. Boyce Davies recounts into the left of Karl Marx that the lives of Harriet Tubman and Emma Lazarus are a refutation of women's inequality and lies that from early youth were a pursuit of truth. So that's legacy right there. This image was produced by ChatGPT, ironically enough. Interesting what ChatGPT is doing out here. But the actualized words of young Black women produce the ancestral knowledge of Nomo. The generation and transformation of their sounds contribute to the speaker's word magic. This is a word magic that an auto-generated technology like ChatGPT cannot reproduce because it is embodied by the utterance from the human mouth. The utterances of young Black women then become the real AI, an ancestral intelligence that leads us to Afrofutures that have the potential to address the intersections between race and technology. Young Black women's Afrofuturistic word magic disrupts the linear algorithmic timelines of Eurocentricity to lead us toward multifaceted Ubuntu possibilities. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Carr. Brilliant. So now we're going to listen to Nicole Mensa. As the video loads, I'm going to introduce Nicole Mensa. Not loaded yet? Okay, so I'm going to use those 2 minutes to introduce her. Since this. There is a memorable scene here that we just wanted to give the space for.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're doing well.
These moments don't happen every day. No, we have to give space for that. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Thank you. Okay, so Nicole Mensa. Could you give me a minute? Okay, so this is the fourth presenter in this panel, and it's Nicole Mensa, who is an economist and social entrepreneur, who is passionate about the economic empowerment of women and development of poor countries. Currently, Ms. Mensa is the special assistant and advisor on women and trade to the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. She is also the WTO Fund Manager of the joint WTO ITC Women Exporters in the Digital Economy Fund, which seeks to support women entrepreneurs in the developing countries with funding and technical assistance. Nicole Mensa obtained both her bachelor's degree, summa cum laude, in economics and Africana studies, and master's degree in applied economics and management from Cornell University. Of course, Nicole Mensa was a student who worked with Dr. Carole Boyce Davies. Please join me in welcoming Nicole Mensa, who sadly couldn't be here, but celebrated us with this video. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that was another brilliant intervention and a recognition of Professor Carole Boyce Davies' work and impact. So in the interest of time, I'm going to limit my intervention to just a few remarks. As I said at the outset, my interaction with Professor Davies, spans more than a decade. It has been an intervention in the form of intellectual engagement and sociality. She has mentored me in multiple ways, invited me to join her panel at the African Studies Association annual conferences, invited me to contribute to a collection of essays, which is coming up next year that I think she just mentioned it in the, yes, it's called the Black Feminist Theories Handbook, Transnational Approaches. She invited me to deliver a guest lecture, let's see, for the seminar in Africana Studies. Let's see, she spearheaded and started a series called Wednesdays, Wines, and Words, which was very much fun. we were sampling, words, Wednesdays, and wines. I learned a lot when we were working on several dissertation projects with her. Marshall Smith, Kanyinsola Obayan, Marsha Jean-Charles, and of course, delicious and fabulously curated dinners. And of course, as you can imagine, I have benefited a lot intellectually and personally from her. Yes, Carole Boyce Davies' intellectual project has been practical, of course, prescriptive, but also intellectual. And one of her theories that has impacted me is one of subjectivities, because I consider subjectivities as a centerpiece of who we are as human beings, or also who we are as intellectual. Her theory of subjectivity comprises a rich and multifaceted body of thought that centers the experience, struggles, and epistemologies of Black women and beyond. Of course, Black women, that is the expensive category. But as I said at the outset, she also takes into account Latina, African, Caribbean, but she uses the category of Black women. But she's interested in human beings wherever they find themselves. Her rumination tackles the recognition that systems of oppression, be them racism, sexism, classism, and more, intersect in complex ways, that mainstream feminism and racist discourses have historically failed to fully acknowledge. And feminist theories are not just critique, they're also creative, speculative, and world building. They just don't reveal structures of domination, but insist on alternative modes of knowing, relating, and being. They generate counter archives, speculative futures, rituals of survival, and poetic and spiritual vocabularies of freedom. And as we just learned, and lived through, one paradox of our time is the crystallizations of material borders for some and the dismantling of borders for others. Despite the false equality promised by the digital revolution, hyper-digitalization has made figurative border crossing and migration an existential condition for all. In that context, how do we understand border crossing as the centerpiece of subject formation and freedom? I will leave us with that question and open up the floor for questions, answers, celebratory remarks, and both for us and Professor Fatima Jan online. Thank you. And please keep your questions and celebratory words short so we can hear as many voices as possible. Thank you. Professor Jagne, are you there? Siga,
Yes,
are you there with us?
I am. I am
Yes.
here.
Can you tell us more about the women on the continent who are speaking up against what is happening right now in the United States? Because one of your points was that we were not hearing from public officials on the continent speaking up. So can you expand more on that point?
Yes, actually, I think the most famous one who has been speaking up has been the new Prime Minister of Namibia. I think she's been all over, everywhere, every country you go to, you see her on the screen. And I think also the Traoré in Mali has been very visible since these discussions have started. But I think when you really look, they don't show a lot of women, but when you go to East Africa, most of the countries have women as presidents, and but you never hear about them. And they've been very active, and they have done very well and have changed the lives of women in these countries. We hear mostly, we hear about wars in Africa. We hear about people not knowing what they're doing, which is not true, because I think we have all our policies. We have, because that was my area actually. For a long time, I was working on policies for ECOWAS and countries around Africa, which have yielded very good dividend for the countries. And I think this is the future. And if you notice, there are more and more women now heading countries in Africa than before. And I think it's going to continue. And the young people are not staying behind either. They are very active, especially on the FGM issue. They're marching every day. They're making sure that their body integrity stays, the integrity of their body stays with them. And we've had a big scandal, of course, in Gambia, as usual, when the Islamic scholars decided that they wanted to make sure that they start doing FGM, female genital mutilation. But the young ladies themselves, I have to be honest, fought against it, and it did not happen. But that doesn't mean that they're not doing it on the ground, which is also very sad, because we've lost a lot of young girls to FGM, even in the US. It's been very rampant, and they had to have a law for it. And that's how it came, the numbers came down. So these some of the issues that we're working with, and we're also making sure that all the that our young girls get to the university. Right now, if you go to the university, you're going to see more of the girls than the boys. And I think that is very important. What am I doing?
Yeah, I mean,
How
thank
do
you.
I'm removed. Oh, okay. Let me just get the video out and talk. I think we're working on the gender issue very well. And I know at the Economic Community of West African States, we have scholarships actually for young women to who are trying to be engineers and trying to make sure that they succeed in life and they contribute to the country. And this has been, I think, a new opening. And also at the level of the continental programs, I think we are seeing more of young women, especially, working in, which was very difficult before. But now when you go to the African Development Bank, all those offices, you'll find a lot of young women now. And I think what we need to do is encourage them to continue doing that and stay away from some of the things that I think are also seeping into our cultures, which we're talking about it here, because I think the young women have been fighting on the FGM, and I think that one has really dwindled, especially in the urban areas. People are not working on it now. People are not doing it. And I think for me, what is critical at this point, and I had said I was not going back to the university. I will just write, but I think I'm going back because there's still male domination at university level, especially in the sciences. They're very good young women who do well at their O levels, A level, and yet they're not being accepted into the scientific areas which they studied and got good grades in. So I think these are areas that as teachers and as activists, we can work to make sure and push our countries to make sure that the education sector brings equality into for our girls, so that they will all sit there with you with their PhDs and talk about their experiences. Because some of us just wanted to stay in school forever. That's why we got those degrees, but these ones are actually.
That's very useful. That's
yeah,
very
some of us just
know.
love to be, no, some of us love school. I'm one of those. So,
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Jan. Yes, Miriam, Professor Moise.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the panel. I have just a question for Carole, please. Carole Archer, I mean. I was, you discussed the different leaders of the Caribbean. And I think, in fact, in Carole Boyce Davies' book on Black women's rights, the circularities of power, I wonder if you could expand on a comparative, with a comparative perspective between Eugenia Charles and Mia Mottley, like the first one and then the most recent one. I think it would be interesting to have this kind of comparison because, of course, Eugenia, we know it has been very controversial, but she was the first prime minister up to date. She is the only female prime minister of Dominica. She was also the first female lawyer of Dominica. And, 40 years apart between the two in terms of leadership. So the leadership style, because this is what Boyce Davies develops in her work, in circularities of power. In terms of leadership style, if you could just tell us a bit more about these two leaders. And just one short comment regarding Courtney's work. I really enjoyed it. I just wanted to pay homage to the Venus Autentate, just to say that, in fact, her remains were then claimed by the South African government in 2002 and were repatriated. So she was buried in her country. And in fact, it's a very important story to mention in this context. Thank you very much to all of you, and of course to Professor Siga as well. Thank you.
Okay, so let's take 2 more questions in the interest of time, because we want to end at 1.
Yeah, thank you so much as well for the panel. It was incredibly insightful to hear all of you. And thank you as well for this question, because my question is also going this direction of the ideology, which I think is something as well that the quote from Professor Boyce Davies that was in the first presentation also brought to light in terms of thinking not all leadership is the same, it doesn't have to be the same, they're complex in their own rights, and we have to understand them to honor their complexity. Shouldn't be a straightforward line, which also reminds me of the Saadia Bartman context, because, and here just very quickly, in the 19th century, there are 3 written records of her speaking or tentatively speaking, and only one is thought to be actually true, that when she spoke, and she had a translator as well, translating into Dutch, and she refused to answer some questions. And I think that's very important as well. The refusal, she also refused to take off her clothes when she was in France. And I think that's also very, very important to keep in mind, that she can also decide. Exactly. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Okay, so let me add 2 more remarks. Who are the audience of our scholarship? Because Courtney, for example, when you provided the pictures of Sarah's apartment, you will assume that most of in this audience are familiar with our scholarship, because after all, we're celebrating Carole Boyce Davies. Was that useful? Was the image useful? The reproduction of these images, when we think about double exposures, was that useful? Okay, so that's one point. Conceptually speaking, is cutting expensive enough as opposed to female surgeries, female genital surgery as opposed to female genital cutting? Because cutting is excision. Surgeries are much more expensive and much more complex. So, okay, so just to throw these things out there. So, Professor, who is the audience of our scholarship? How do we imagine the audience of our scholarship? Thank you. We don't have to answer, just
yeah. Thanks. So I'll answer the first question, and thank you for that. I believe we have to look at in terms of the times. Yes, Eugenia Charles would have been coming out of the colonial times where we were pressing for independence. But she, if you look at her work, she would have taken the path of least resistance. Yes, so she comes out of that tradition, separate and apart from, say, those who would have the Barry Shows and the Eric Williams and Norman Manley and so forth, right? So we have to understand that context. Mia is a student of the Manleys and so she would have learned not the part of least resistance, but we have to do it for ourselves. We have to define. And so you will see the language and how she positioned the whole question of, and she said it when you look at her pronouncements, the importance of the Caribbean, that Caribbean identity, the West Indian Federation, the Caribbean Federation. She really wants us to give that some full consideration. And it's almost as if saying, time is now for us to embrace that identity. Also, at the time with Eugenia Charles, the men control the space. Now, I believe that Mia is commanding the space, because when you look at the capacity of the men who are there, it is quite easy for her to command the space, and she's doing that. We're all sitting and going, hey, go ahead. Back in the days prior to, before Eugenia Charles, we would have had the Manleys. He had exited, her and her compatriots came in. not much happened in terms of the identity and how we command the political space, whether it is male, female dominated. But now the opportunity is there, and people like the mayor and Yvette Clarke and others, they are stepping to the space and commanding and demanding based on whether it's a racial, ethnic, or regional identity. They are able to do that now. In terms of the audience, so right. So certainly for the work that I have been doing around the question of identity and political participation, I had intended for the audience to be the Caribbean diaspora in North America. Sadly, though, for me, when we look at the work and said, look, for you to demand and control this political space, you need to build institutions, you need to provide support for communities. And we literally, because there was a group of us who was advancing the scholarship, and none of that happened. And as a result, we have a splintering of the various groups, and especially in New York City. So right now, based on the work we were doing at the time, this was in the early 90s, we had expected the growth of various community-based organization, economic groups, and so forth. It has been so splintered now. And so I'm thinking that we now need to begin to coalesce around that of race as opposed to the Caribbean identity.
I'll quickly add that the audience for mine are these websites. I want them to change. I think what I'm implying by using Tagisi's story is that Tagisi can tell her own story. So why are we allowing folks at the World Health Organization to tell it for her? And I think that Sarah Baartman is an important mirror for her because, as folks alluded to, Sarah Baartman was an empowered person who knew how to tell her story. So does Tagisi. And in my dissertation, I capture some of the words of these young women from their own mouths, showing that they can tell their own stories. We don't need a little caption to tell the story for them. Surgeries as opposed to cutting. I think surgeries are a medicalization of realities as well. And that's happening really, that's a US-centric way of looking at reality, I would argue, because it's medicalizing the practice. And I think cutting allows the space for it to be a practice. But I think surgeries also brings into question this notion of bodily modification, period, and folks getting BBLs and all of that stuff. I always like to fold Sarah Baartman into how we think about BBLs and how it's a huge conversation right now. And I think because it's regarded as surgery, it isn't thought of as in comparison to female genital cutting, but we have to ask better questions as to why not.
Okay. On that note, one more question? Okay, wonderful. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you both for this, everyone, for these amazing presentations. A quick question for Dr. Archer. In terms of thinking about this shift for the Caribbean women political leaders that you engage to thinking about Blackness as at least a salient or potentially a more useful space to be leveraged. I was wondering about inviting you to reflect, giving the kind of quote that Dr. Diabate starts with from Dr. Boyce Davies about the fact that anytime we get a new category, it's a moment of departure. And so I'm wondering for you, what is this Black that becomes this new place for these women leaders to leverage? Like, what are the kind of linchpins that give this iteration of Black meaning for them, right? And what might be some of the experiences or the histories that become galvanized or present or even obfuscated towards moving to this versus Caribbean?
Yeah. So one of the things when you asked the question, I jarred my memory. I recall when we in Jamaica, we were having um, financial crisis, and it was the Congressional Black Caucus who had levied on our behalf to the World Bank, IMF, for special arrangement. And they did so because one, Portia Simpson Miller was at the helm, and they because of how she presented and the pronouncement along the identity of race and being African and the Pan-African view, that resonated with the the caucus, that resonated with the wider African community, and they were able to get the support. And so, because that has worked and that is working for Mia Motley now, that is why I would recommend, because we, in terms of the Caribbean identity, while it had worked, especially during the 90s, for the Caribbean diaspora, and especially in New York, they were able to leverage, but they did not build on that, which was the necessary support, the institute. In fact, when you look now at most of those institutions that would be necessary to continue, that those have actually been crumbling, if not failed. What has maintained is that whole question of our racial identity. Finally, if we're to advance this whole discussion around reparation, yes, that has to be supported by this question of our, Pan-Africanist racial identity. And so that is why I am now positioning this argument. Yes.
Comment. Just so you know, Carole Archer also is very much involved in the actual politics of electioneering in Jamaica and has also run for office. So this is a possible future leader you're looking at. I just wanted you to know that.
Yes.
She didn't say that, but this is who she is. And this is really, really important. There's one student from my last Black woman in political leadership class here, and I'd like you please stand up so people know who you are. Tell them who you are.
Hello, thank you. My name is Aliana. I'm a third year double majoring in government and Africana studies, and I hopefully plan one day to actually get my PhD to be a Black woman right here and, give my own presentation one day. So yeah, thank you.
On that aspirational, future-oriented framework, we will close this panel. Thank you so much. So let's take a quick break.
No, don't we do lunch?